Hi, my name's Lucas, and my TED Talk is about the boy crisis. Before we begin with that, though, I'd like to begin by asking you all a question. Out of all of you here, how many of you have seen your moms cry more than your dads? Raise your hand up if you have. Okay, so looking around, I think we would clearly see a difference there, right? People see their moms cry more than their dads. And that brings me to the issue that I want to address here today. Because when I say the boy crisis, I mean the recent problems that have been occurring which concern the mental health of teenage boys, and the secret enrollment of men into a system in which they are not allowed to express their emotions, forced into people's expectations of what they should and shouldn't be and act like. Now, why do I, and more importantly, why should you, care about all of this? Well, the story of how I came to be here starts last year. In my school, we have regular PSHE lessons, in which we all sit down and talk about world issues, which I think is pretty important, right? Now, at the time, we happened to be doing a topic on the mental health of teenagers, and I realized that most of these talks were centered around the mental health and violence that teenage girls face. So they were talking about sexual violence, social injustices, and just general things like that, right? Now, what ended up happening here is that while this view is very important, and there are problems that go on in this sector, we ended up developing a sort of bias where the boys would end up feeling guilty after these talks, right? Feeling like we were being accused of these acts, even though that wasn't the school's intention. And a lot of the boys ended up transmitting these emotions through anger and by not paying attention to the talks. I personally found this attitude very concerning, so I began to research the topic. And that's when I realized that this wasn't just an isolated case. Because across the globe, we are being haunted by a specter. A crisis that most of us don't even realize is occurring until it strikes inside our homes and in our families. It is an epidemic of depression and anxiety that most boys and men inside first world countries face, and it has grown into what many have come to call the boy crisis. Now, some of you out there in the audience may be thinking, gee, Lucas, this all seems very brass and unreasonable. I mean, when we have realized if boys just started to get depressed all over the place? Well, I think the statistics speak for themselves. A study here on suicide rates per gender in 2018 found that the suicide rate is close to 4 times higher for men than it is for women. And that statistic is only rising. Or how about a survey by the AARP, which shows that 1 in 3 men regularly feel lonely and misunderstood? I knew that there had to be a reason behind this, but I just had to find out why. And unfortunately, let me tell you folks, I didn't have to look for very long. First of all, to fully understand this problem, think of the images that we have of men in our society, right? The lone cowboy, the stoic warrior, the emotionless beast. In most cultures, boys are taught from a very young age to hide their emotions, to man up, to not cry, right? You've all heard it, the whole boys don't cry thing. What ends up happening here, though, is very subtle indoctrination of men into a system in which they are taught to keep it to themselves. If you try to talk about your feelings or about how insecure you feel, you're more likely than not be seen as a wussy or other worse things, which I can't say because I'm in a TED Talk. Now, so to recap, what ends up happening here is a generation of young boys who are taught to suppress their emotions, who then grow up to become young adults who often feel lonely and lack a connection to those around them. Add this up to the stress and confusion of teenagehood, by now I think that you can see that the boy crisis is something that we need to take seriously. So, on to the doing part. What are the solutions? Well, for one, spreading awareness. I know it seems cheesy, but telling people about the topic, your parents, your kids, your family, that's the number one solution to the boy crisis, just as it has been to many other social injustices before it. If people are educated on a matter, then they can move on to prevent the issue from ever taking place. So parents, if you notice that something's been seeming off with your son, that he's been acting down or overly anxious lately, ask him about it and get help if needed. And boys, I can personally assure you that talking about your problems is the best way to feel better about them. If you're walking along the road and suddenly you trip and you break a leg, you don't just continue on with your normal day, right? You tell someone about it. And it's the same for this. People aren't going to judge you, and feeling bad isn't good. So if you feel like there's something that you need to get off your shoulders, please, 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 Go to someone you trust and tell them about it. And I know that it often isn't that simple, right? Some of you might not have somebody to turn to or a hand to pat you on the shoulder when you're feeling down, right? And if that's so, or maybe you just feel like just talking about it isn't going to get rid of your problems. And if that's so, I would personally recommend seeking professional help and not feeling ashamed about it. You are not broken, and there are hundreds, if not thousands, of people out there who are going through the same things that you are. So, and who want to help. But you will only find them if you have the courage to start looking. So, still not convinced? Let me give you an example on my part. Now, I naturally am a person with a lot of anxiety, right? And a year ago, I moved here to Spain during the COVID pandemic. Now, I hate change. And suddenly I found that my whole life was being flipped upside down. I was in a country whose culture I was unfamiliar with, in a pandemic which had completely changed millions of people's lives, and on top of that, I couldn't even go to the local McDonald's and order a Big Mac to feel better by myself. What a time to live in, huh? So, anyway, all of this change had me nervous to the point where even the most minor decision would make me go completely, have a panic attack, right? So my mom would ask me, honey, do you want ketchup or mayonnaise with your fries? And I would be like, would you please stop pressuring me? Now, while that may seem funny in retrospect, it wasn't that funny back then. And I ended up spending a whole year of my life in that state. Until eventually, I asked my parents about it, and I got help. My only regret, though, is that I didn't talk sooner. So, the point I'm trying to make here, gentlemen, is to talk to someone if you're feeling down. And to the others here, if a guy comes up to you and asks to talk to you about something, don't just shrug it off. Be understanding and take him seriously. Because every time that you do, we will be one step closer to changing the world's attitude towards men and to solving the boy crisis. Thank you.